Hey, it is Zennial Gamer here today to tell you guys stop asking what you should use for slots 2, 4, and 6. Not because you shouldn't know what to put on the monster, but because in today's Summoner's War, stats are a fluid thing, and it really doesn't matter if you use a speed, or an HP, or an attack, or an accuracy, or resistance, whatever. It doesn't matter what you guys use. What matters is that you hit your target stats. So we're going to start off by looking at a couple of monsters that I have built in what I would call like an unorthodox way. Starting off with the Wusa. So guys, what do you think this Wusa is on? I think most of you will probably guess, because the whole point of this video is that my RTA Wusa is using an HP slot 2. This is not a unique thing for me. Now obviously, I've got really good runes, I'm a Guardian player. Not everybody's gonna have an extra 25 speed slot 2 HP laying around, but maybe you've got a quad roll defense HP slot 6 and your Fang could use that 50 defense sub instead of a 63 defense. Maybe you've got an accuracy rune that's 120% efficiency with 40 HP, and that's gonna fix your problem of not being able to get to 85 accuracy. So speaking of accuracy, let's take a look at another build. Guys, this is my Nana build for RTA. I actually have a very similar Nana build in the game. Nana is on a slot 6 accuracy rune. What about Miho? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. She's got a crit damage rune. She might have a resistance rune. She might have resistance through subs, and she might be on an attack slot 6. Like, these stats that you're looking at right now, and we're gonna stop on the Miho for a second because this isn't about a stat or rune exhibition showcase. I actually do have a video coming up on that. This is about planning out your builds. If we look at this Miho, 81 speed means she could have a speed slot 2, or she could have an HP slot 2 and really good speed subs on the rest of the runes. 86 crit rate means she could have a crit rate rune and ridiculous like 30 crit damage per rune. Also means she could have a crit damage rune, right? 100 resistance. It could be a resistance rune, it could be resistance through subs. The point is, in today's game, with artifacts, with being able to manipulate your stats using artifacts, and with the crazy amount of rune drops that we get, and with the crazy amount of R5 that we can run with solo R5 and BJR5 being easy and everything else, stats are a fluid concept, and what I want to get, if there's one thing you guys take away from this video, what I hope to impart is that it's no longer about should I have speed, crit damage, attack, should I have HP, crit rate, HP, whatever. It's about how many stats do I need for each stat line. Do I need 20,000 HP? Do I need 30,000 HP? Do I need 200 speed? Do I need 250 speed? Do I need whatever crit rate? Those are the questions that I want you guys to ask yourselves. Not which runes do I use, and not which monster does this rune fit, because that's kind of an extension of which runes do I use. But what stats do I need on my monster, and how do I get there? Now, we are going to use this Miho as an example. The Miho happens to be on attack, crit damage, resistance. Not a normal Miho build, not an unusual one either. I'm sure there's a lot of people who do have that combination. But it was what got me the stats I wanted. Specifically, when I thought about my Miho build, what did I prioritize? First and foremost, I prioritized resistance because these days with Onimushas and everything else, Miho is a very niche specific build that you only use against high crit rate AoE teams, like if you run into a Julie Bastet cleave, something like that. And in that Julie Bastet cleave, Julie Lucian cleave, there's always a Bastet. So Miho needs max resistance so she doesn't get heal blocked by the Bastet, because the heal block means you lose. She needs a little bit of accuracy so she can stun. She doesn't need a lot, because in today's RTA, Bastet is pretty much always on a slot 6 accuracy rune, sometimes resistance, but usually accuracy. So what you need is enough accuracy to make sure you can stun a Bastet who happens to awaken into resistance. So she already has 40 resistance. You want about 25 accuracy on the Miho. You need obviously tons of crit damage. She gets a guaranteed crit on her revenges, but you also need crit rate because you need to be able to crit when you attack, and you need to be able to heal. You're going to think about these stats now in terms of priority. So my number 1 priority was resistance. My number 2 priority was crit rate. My number 3 priority was HP. I don't think Miho needs a lot of HP, but just in case the opponent drafts a Ciara, you do want to be able to survive a Ciara bomb. 20 to 22,000 HP will survive a non-attacked buff Ciara bomb usually. If it's attack buffed, you're going to lose the Miho either way, and you don't need to go higher. So, as I built my Miho, I thought about all of these stats. Now, I know not everybody has or uses the optimizer, but the optimizer is the best way to demonstrate this. When we come into the optimizer, this is how I might have run my Miho. I just want to give you guys an example. Now, I am using the Summoner's War Optimizer Pro, so just a disclaimer, if you use the free version, which is totally fine, but if you use the free version, you probably can't run your builds as broadly as I'm going to show you right now. But if you have the Pro version, or if you have lots of patience and you don't mind waiting a few hours for a build to run, you could do this in the free version as well. So, for our Miho, we know we want Vampire Nemesis. For our slots 2, 4, 6, we want any rune that helps us get to the target stats that we are looking for. So we're thinking about speed, attack, and HP for a slot 2. Crit rate, crit damage, attack, and HP can all help me on a slot 4. Because what if I've got an HP rune that quad rolled crit rate, and I also have a slot 2 and a slot 6 attack rune that both quad rolled crit rate, and I have like 30 resistance subs on a slot 3, 5, and 1, I can make all my stats through that really funky build. I've actually had this come up in the optimizer before. The single best damage build I had for my Poseidon for a very long time used an attack slot 4, not a crit damage slot 4. It was this weird build that was like speed, attack, and it had like just tons and tons of high crit damage subs, but all those runes that had crit damage subs had no attack on them, and so I needed the slot attack 4 to multiply it. Anyway, now for our slot 6, we're looking at resistance, attack, and HP. Do we want a defense rune on slot 6? No. Miho does not need defense. You actually, because you're running her on Nemesis, you want the defense low. You just want enough HP to survive one cocky hit or one CR bomb, just because those are the two main things that can counter her. And you also need enough HP to make sure that maybe like a Bastet skill 1 can't kill you too easily. Do we need an accuracy rune on Miho slot 6? No, because we already said we only want about 25 accuracy, and the reality is that we can get 20-25 accuracy off of an artifact. So, what we're going to do now, I personally run my builds without the artifact optimization because it takes so much longer to run it with the artifact optimization, but you can run it both ways. So what I would do here is disable artifact optimization, and then I would think about all the target stats that I want, and I would load in an artifact's worth of less value. And by that what I mean is if I want 20,000 HP, I'll load in 17,000 because I know that I can put 3,000 HP on through artifacts. If I want 1,000 defense, and I don't care about defense on Miho, but if I want 1,000 defense, I put in 800 defense because I know I can use flat defense artifacts. And then when I pick my final build, I'll have it in my mind that if I'm short on a specific stat, I'll use an artifact to make it up. So in the case of Miho, what I did was something probably like 1800 attack. We don't really care too much about the speed because of how we use her, and because of the Nemesis, she's gonna lap. So I probably left the speed empty, but you might want some speed, you might put 200, we don't care about effective HP. For crit rate, I'd go somewhere around 80, 75 to 80 is the floor for her, I feel like. For resistance, 100. For accuracy, 15. And then from there, I can actually come over here and I can program through damage options. I can program just like a test scenario to see exactly how much damage my Miho does. If you guys are curious what that would look like, so you would come in here and you would basically assume there's not going to be a defense break or an attack buff because we're using her just to counter a cleave where we're acting second. So what we're looking at is an enemy that might have about 1200 defense. And you can put in any number here. It truly doesn't matter because all we want is a point of reference to compare one build to another. And so if the 1200 defense is what's calculated and the highest damage build is 5000 damage and we change it to 1500 defense, maybe the highest damage build now is 4500 damage, but it's still the same build because all we're doing is comparing the builds to each other. We don't have a target damage that we need to do with Miho, where you might have a target damage number with a monster like Odin, for example. Odin needs to do at least 45,000 HP if you're going to bring him into a team with a Triana, for example. Or Belager, when you build him for solo R5. For BGR5, he needs to do 32,000 damage. For solo R5, better off at 37,000, 38,000 damage. So those are monsters where we need everything exactly right. With the Miho, we don't. We just need a point of reference. So we'll call 1200 enemy defense because that's about average for a bruiser type build. We don't care about enemy element because we're not running the artifact optimizer. If you do run the artifact optimizer, then you would put in water because the Bastet's usually the threat on those teams to the Miho. If your Miho is skilled up, go ahead and max the skills. Over here, she's not going to ignore defense. All she does is single target abilities. And again, single target ability only for artifacts. You don't need to worry about it for this particular build, but you can check it. And then all the rest of this we're going to leave off, and then we want to know how much she does on an average hit. Now, remember that Miho has a guaranteed crit on her revenges. So if you're checking for damage on revenge, then you would always assume a crit rate. But because we're using Miho in this specific situation against the Bastet cleave, the Bastet teams have shields. And that means that we need to be able to break those shields on offense if we're going to be able to get enough health back on defense as well. Defense meaning when we revenge crit. So that's why we need crit rate, is because if you can't do enough damage on offense to bust the shields, then when you revenge, all your damage is soaked up by the shield and you stay at 1 HP and you die. So we're going to look at average to make sure we're doing enough damage on the offensive side, not even worrying about revenges. And then we go ahead and optimize, and there we go. We've got our builds. And now you can actually just sort by damage, because what we're looking for is really our highest damage Miho. She doesn't have to do a whole lot because she hit all of our other target stats. That's the beauty of this. I already said, as long as she's got X, Y, and Z, then the best build for me when she has X, Y, and Z is damage. So this is my highest damage build. Now I just take a quick look at the stats. I'm a little short on my target HP, but my attack is good and my defense is good. Everything else is good. So in this case, I would be able to just throw on 1 HP artifact and then 1 attack artifact to get some extra attack. Now, I did one video kind of similar to this maybe about a year ago. So for those of you guys who saw that video and you remember this reference, I love this. I think it's the perfect analogy. If you've ever seen Ender's Game, remember, the enemy's gate is down. So what that means in this context is, again, stats are fluid because you get so many subs and so many grinds and you can change your stats with artifacts and everything else, that at the end of the day, what you want to look for is the single best build that makes the most sense for your monster. Now, part of that is remembering that most substats, not obviously we have flat stats, but most substats are going to be percentage based, right? So if you've got a monster that has a crazy high stat in 1 or 2 areas and a crazy low stat in another area, like this Perna right here, who has insane HP and also insane attack, but one of the worst defenses in the game, you get more value when you amplify those super high stats by a percentage sub, and you get less value. That's the other thing to remember. You get less value when you multiply them by a defense sub. So think about this Perna, 439 defense. If you put 100% of defense through substats, and that's 8.5 rolls, 8.5 max rolls, that's like an entire rune's worth of rolls, you would only have 880 defense on her. Whereas if you did the same thing with Fang, you would have 1700 defense, because Fang would be getting is 800 plus defense and 100% of that again, where Perna is getting 400 and 100%. So instead, what you want to do with Perna is amplify the attack, which is super high with lots of percentage subs. You want to amplify the HP, which is super high with lots of HP percentage subs. You want to get some defense maybe through flat stats. Obviously, you don't want to like gem in flat stats, but if you have a rune that has a random flat stat on it, this is a great place to use it, because your 60 flat defense, that's equal to a 15% defense sub on Perna. But your 60 flat defense is equal to a 7-8% defense sub on Fang. So it gives way more value on Perna. Now, I know efficiency formulas are going to calculate it the same way, and it should, because, you know, when you think about the efficiency of what a rune could have as opposed to what it does have, it makes sense. But when you think about how you use it on a monster, you want to take that into mental evaluation. Now, the other thing is artifacts. So if we cared about Perna having defense, and we really don't, not for the way Perna's used, but if we cared about Perna having defense, what we would do is put defense artifacts on her instead of, in this case, attack artifacts. Vigor is actually another really good example. Vigor has a stupid low defense, and most of us put HP artifacts on our Vigor because, hey, he scales to HP, right? But the reality is that you probably have some big defense subs on some of his runes. If you're trying to get him even to like 1,000 or 1,200 defense, you probably have 100% of defense subs on his runes. What if you took that 100% and you shifted that all over to other stats that are more efficient for him, and you gave him flat defense artifacts? Now, all of a sudden, that 200 flat defense that you get out of artifacts That's a 40% boost to his defense, as opposed to it only being like 24% boost to his HP. That means you basically got 2 extra rolls on your vigor by using artifacts, which are flat stats, to supplement his lowest base stat. Same deal would work for the Perna. If we use flat defense right here, 2 flat defense artifacts on Perna is like 46%. That's like freaking 5.5, 6 rolls of subs on your Perna. Other thing that the enemy's gate is down means is that you want to think outside of the box with your overall build. So not only is it about finding the best use of your runes on a monster, it's about realizing how much a monster needs of a specific stat. How much crit damage do you guys think my Carcano has right here? How much crit damage do you think he has? Now, if I tell you that this guy hits for about 40,000, he hits for 40,000, he basically insta-kills anything I target. How much crit damage do you think he has? Most of you probably guessed 50. He actually has 54. I think we have an innate crit damage sub somewhere. Yeah, so we do have a lot of attack. We have almost 1,600 attack. We have 54 crit damage. And then we've obviously got some pretty good crit damage off of artifacts. So this artifact right here, we've got 12 and another 5, that's 17%. This artifact right here, we've got 7 and another 5 is 12%, so we're getting 29% damage, crit damage off our artifacts. Now, there's a couple of things that means. First of all, 29% crit damage off of artifacts when your monster has 54 crit damage means we're getting 50% more crit damage off of him just through artifacts. And he doesn't even have my best artifacts for Carcano. As you guys can see, I have 5 of them built. And he's got the highest attack of the 5, so he's got the worst artifacts of the 5 to balance that out. But besides the fact that I'm getting amazing value on the crit damage, it also means that all that crit damage that I didn't have to put on my runes, I was able to use other substats. And that's how I've got a Carcano that's at 236 speed with plus 1,600 attack and still has almost 30k HP and 1,200 defense. It's because I use this crit rate slot 4, and you guys see all the grinded stats there. That's the beauty of a crit rate rune. It can have quad grinds. Now, a crit damage can also have quad grinds, but a crit damage rune with no crit rate makes it almost impossible to get enough crit rate on your monster, because you now need to get 85 crit rate off your other 5 runes. You have 1 rune that's giving you none. So if you want to get your monster to 100%, you've got to average 19 crit rate per rune on your other 5 runes. Now, even if you average 18 and we go a little bit lower, that's 3 rolls. So how are you going to get your monster fast enough to be on a siege defense and still give him or her HP and defense and attack and all the other stats they need when you're using half the rolls or almost half the rolls on every rune for crit rate? Statistically, it's just not possible. You could have the best runes in the game that are all max rolled and all perfect, but if you put them on crit damage, and your crit damage rune is quad grinded and not giving you crit rate, you are not going to be able to get stats equivalent to what you can on a crit rate rune. It's just because crit rate can't be grinded. That's really what it comes down to. Every percentage-based stat can be grinded. Crit rate, crit damage, accuracy, resistance cannot be grinded. Crit rate, crit damage, accuracy, and resistance can be used as main runes, but a crit damage rune is completely worthless when you don't crit. Crit damage multiplies the damage when you get a critical hit. Accuracy, I was going to say resistance. Resistance is mostly worthless too, guys. We all know that. And resistance actually does have its uses. Specifically, you would use resistance anytime you're going in against a monster that is traditionally built on low accuracy, like Carcano. Carcano, because he needs so many stats, it's really hard to build this guy with a lot of accuracy. 30-40 is probably the highest most people get to, so that's when you bring a max resistance wind monster in against him, because he'll really struggle to defense break them. I use max resistance Trianas to counter Carcano all the time. But if you go in against a monster that's traditionally built on high accuracy, like a Chung Pung or a Stripper or a Galleon, any of those types of things, your resistance is wasted. Anyway, resistance and accuracy don't have other stats as qualifiers in your own build. If you reach 85 accuracy, you're at max, and there's no other qualifier. If you reach 100 resistance, you're at max, and there's no other qualifier. But if you reach 3 million crit damage, not possible obviously, but it doesn't matter, 300 crit damage, but you don't crit, you wasted all of those stats. Crit rate runes, on the other hand, those are just pure gain. So that's why crit rate runes are so strong in the meta, is because they allow us to make better overall builds and make up the crit damage through our artifacts. Now, obviously this Carcano is playing at about 83, 84 crit damage, as opposed to like 180 on a crit damage rune. But on a crit damage rune, he doesn't have 1600 attack either. Crit damage multiplies the total damage you do through your base attack. So if I've only got 12 or 1300 attack, then I'm multiplying a much lower number by the crit damage, and the overall damage output is not that great. The other thing to remember is if my Carcano can hit for 40k, why do I need him to hit for 70? Anyway guys, on that note, as always, hope you enjoyed the video. I appreciate you watching. Don't forget, guys, don't forget, subscribe, turn the bell notifications on, leave a comment. It helps in the YouTube algorithm, and we'll catch you guys next time.